With a toast.
HTML5 cheers.
That's right.
I'd like to propose a toast to HTML6.
Yeah, okay. All right.
HTML6.
May it actually work and be better.
I can't reach any of your glasses.
There you go.
May the never-ending war between Wutwig and W3C be dead by the time HTML6 comes about.
That's never going to happen, unfortunately.
But on that note, what kind of crazy misconceptions have you run across? I know you've probably run across crazy misconceptions when you're developing games for this HTML5 platform, and people think, that's not possible, you can't do X, Y, and Z. What kind of misconceptions have you run across?
They think it has to be on the web, for one.
Okay.
And it's embedded, it can live anywhere. Ours live in embedded little applications that are distributed through Steam, which is highly unconventional. But it's not really the web anymore, you know? It's kind of this tiny little application that lives on its own. It's web technology, but it doesn't reach out to the internet, you know? It doesn't touch any servers. It lives on its own. And a lot of people, they find out it's made in HTML5 and they just assume that it's part of the web, you know?
When you say a lot of people, you're thinking non-developers or developers?
Typically non-developers, yeah. But I mean, they barely care as it is, you know?
They just want to play the game.
I think your average gamer hears it's made in HTML5 and they just hear Flash or the web or it's made badly. A lot of there's a negativity to it where they think it's not as quality as a game that was made with some other magical technology that they don't understand either.
So Geoff, speaking of Flash, why didn't you choose Flash as the deployment platform?
Well, it honestly comes down to what we knew. Matt and I spent about 10 years each being web developers, and coming up to HTML5 being a thing, you know, the canvas tag, browser performance, hardware acceleration, all that stuff kind of happened around 2009. And that was when Matt and I decided that, you know, hey, we can actually make games in the browser using these skills that we know, you know, JavaScript, CSS, the DOM, etc. So, yeah. I think one of the big misconceptions that I see a lot is that people think that HTML5 is a magical cross-platform solution. And to a certain degree it can be, but you know, we do an extraordinary amount of work to get the game working on different platforms. We kind of have this baseline, right, where if it's running in Chromium, Google and the people that make Chromium have done a lot of the work for us to make Chromium work cross-platform, but there's still issues, bugs that you have to work through on every different platform, not to mention different browsers. So
you must see a lot of different perspectives on this thing, because in Code Project you have all these different languages, developers gathering together from all different walks of life, and I know you've shared some of those perspectives, but you know, tell me how is HTML5 viewed outside of the biased table here?
See, it's interesting because my take on HTML5 is probably different than yours, because my audience are developers, and so there aren't really that many misconceptions. We know what JavaScript is and HTML5 and CSS. We know its warts and its ugliness and all the rest of it. But it's interesting. I think I was talking to you about the misconception. It's not really a misconception rather than just a conception that JavaScript is a second-class citizen in terms of the programming languages. Like it can write games, it can do lots and lots of things that it can never do before and be almost native in its speed now. But it's still considered this thing that's, it's not a real programming language.
But these perspectives that people have, are they informed perspectives? Like,
of course
do they really know?
Of course not. No, they're developers, and so they're opinionated, and they look at something which isn't their speciality, and they say, well, it's that. It's not C++. It's not C#. It's not whatever. It's a thing you do for scripting DOM elements on a web page, and yeah, okay, so it does this other stuff, but it's not a real programming language.
Well, developers are just like everybody else. You know, everyone likes to pick teams and pick sides, and everybody gets very passionate about code editors, tabs versus spaces, HTML5 versus native. You know, it's just one of the things that comes to the territory of being into something. You know, everyone's going to take up the banner of what they really love.
Exactly. I think speed is probably one of the misconceptions.
All right.
Everyone thinks it's slow. It will never be as fast as, say, a native application. But, you know, with the changes that are coming, and we were talking about SIMD that's coming up, it's getting there. and with a lot of applications, I mean, how much speed do you actually need in a word processor or a game? I mean, obviously a 3D game, you need a little bit more, but it's getting there, right? And you guys are the proof that it's actually happening.
I think it's interesting in the gaming world that you choose to build your games on the technology rather than using it as a compile target, because a lot of the performance optimizations these days, they're happening with, say, the Unreal Game Engine transpiling itself to JavaScript, targeting all these highly optimized things like SIMD and all the other extensions that are coming. So is HTML5 really up to the task of authoring these games on a large scale, or is it more this story that you're going to see people writing in the more traditional languages like you see, the C and the C++ and the Java, and then sort of transpiling to this technology?
Honestly, I do see transpiling being a big thing because JavaScript and the web aren't going away, right? And so they're going to have to be a target somewhere along the line because people want to deploy it to the web. That being said, tool chains for JavaScript and web development have oftentimes lagged behind native development. And obviously there are things that are making that a little bit better than they used to be. But things like Unity, you can output to HTML5, right? And you get the benefit of some optimizations. I think for us, for pretty much any software, I would advocate for the person developing it to use the language they're most comfortable with that gets the job done. There's always going to be little quirks about one language or one platform or another. There's always going to be bugs. There's always going to be weird, quirky things you have to do. And so for us, it comes down to the fact that we have a decade of experience with JavaScript. It's the reason I don't use Flash. The reason I don't use C# is because I know JavaScript inside and out, and I can do what I want with it quickly and efficiently.
Is that a common thing, though? I mean, would you say it's a common skill set for someone, for a typical developer to say, okay, the language I'm most comfortable in is JavaScript?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I don't. Developers come from all places, and there's a lot of web developers out there who know JavaScript really well, and there are also a lot of developers out there who program in other native languages, C++, whatever they don't. And that's why you have things like Nscriptum, converting C code to JavaScript. You have things like Unity, which is a game development suite that will just create web-based content for you from your game. CoffeeScript, if you like to write your language that way, right?
So familiarity with the technology is important. Ian, what do you think in terms of the tooling that we have as available to us as developers? Where is tooling shining and where is it lacking for us?
Well, I think, again, it kind of depends on what you're used to and what you're using. I mean, what you're intending to do. Because, I mean, with HTML5, you can simply just use a text editor. You don't need anything specific. There are a number of things out there that seem to be supporting that, for example, Intel's XDK and so. But I mean, I found that I haven't needed to use anything specific. And in my line of work, we just use PHP Storm browser because we also do lots of stuff in PHP. And then when we do it in HTML5, it works just as well. So I'm probably not the best to answer that question because I haven't really come across it, and we just use one thing and just an editor, and it's fine.
Do you rely on extensions in the editor? I know some people like the text editor, some people like the really well-formed IDEs. I know you have some experience in more the Microsoft world, but are there any extensions that you find critical to your use, or do you use developer tools in the browsers?
Recently, I've started to use a few more extensions and stuff with PHP Storm. We were doing a project recently, but it was using HTML5, but it was mainly, for example, in Angular and stuff. We also decided to use some standards. So we use certain things to just... Shocking. Yeah, I know, for once. To kind of just keep nudging us to say, yeah, you're gone outside the standard, that's wrong. But it wouldn't have been HTML5 specific. So, again, I assume there could be similar extensions and stuff to ensure you're using HTML5 correctly and not putting, I don't know, headers inside the footer and stuff like that. So I can only imagine those things must actually exist.
Well, tooling has become kind of an issue recently due to the use of mobile, because mobile is a platform that has not a lot of the same sort of conveniences that we're used to, the massive amount of memory and
screens.
Yeah, like everything, it's super fast, and a lot of times we can do things fairly inefficient and we can't tell. But on mobile, those little tiny things become big things, and so you really need tooling to see, how much memory you're using, how to optimize using the GPU. Are you using the CPU to render things when you should be using the GPU? When are you using the GPU?
Tooling being more than just editors and debuggers, but actually analyzers and benchmarking.
Yeah, exactly. Things that you see on a lot of the, with a lot of the native languages in mobile, you see a lot of that tooling, and it's more advanced than we have it right now.
So is it becoming on par with the native development, the tools that are available?
No, I don't think for mobile. I don't think. I mean, for the web, yes, they're starting to. I mean, they're
the
making
browsers have
progress.
inbuilt stuff, right?
Yeah, Chrome is doing a lot of really great work. Safari's come out with some really interesting things recently. But for mobile specific, we almost have nothing. I mean, we can use some of the native tools, but it doesn't really give us a whole lot of insight into the actual, web view, if it's hybrid, or you can remote debug from Safari for iOS, but that's, it only gives you a fraction of what you can get in the native environment. So tooling is a huge issue, I think, when it comes to HTML5 in particular.
When you're creating a native application, which then raises the whole question of when would you use HTML5 to create a native application?